Welcome to This Week in Hastings Headline History, where we take a look back at what was making news in Hastings and St. Johns County, Florida, over a century ago. In this podcast, I'll share stories directly out of the pages of the Hastings Herald, which was published weekly in the early 1900s. So let's go back in time for some of the top news stories from this week in February 1920. Fire that raged in Hastings on Tuesday morning threatened to assume conflagration proportions. A fire that for a time threatened to assume the proportions of a conflagration destroyed the auditorium and the garage and machine shop of Stone Street and Miller early Thursday morning. Both buildings were a total loss, only a part of the front wall of the machine shop being left standing, and nothing remained of the auditorium except a pile of ashes. The fire started in the rear of the auditorium at about 1:30 in the morning. Its cause is unknown, but various surmises place it as resulting from sparks from a chimney which found ledgement in a pigeon's nest, rats in matches, and other guesses. The fire engine was unable to reach a water connection without dropping back some distance from the fire, which fact hampered the firemen laying their lines. As soon as connections had been made, however, water was poured onto the fire in great quantities, but the flames had gained too great headway before the alarm was given and could not be placed under control. For a time, they threatened to spread the surrounding houses, that of E.E. Droop standing across the street, suffering to some extent from blistered paint, but being saved by streams of water which the firemen played over it. It was necessary also to play water over the other nearby houses, but good work on the part of the firemen and volunteers contained the fire to the two buildings it had attacked from the outset. For a time, it was thought the machine shop and garage might be saved, the firemen succeeding in extinguishing all the flames on the outside. Apparently, however, the woodwork had become too greatly heated by fire, and flames soon became visible inside the building, afterward bursting through the roof. Considerable excitement was added to the occasion by the presence of several hundred rounds of County Guard ammunition, which was stored in the auditorium, and which popped in a lively manner, throwing bullets in all directions. Various explosions also occurred in the garage as the fire reached oil barrels and tanks, adding further liveliness to the fire. The automobiles in the Stone Street and Miller garage were removed to safety, only one suffering from fire, which started on its top after it had been removed from the building. Two members of a well-known family claimed by influenza in the same week. Influenza claimed for its victims this week two members of a family long identified with Federal Point: J.V. Atkinson, a longtime resident of that village, a prominent town official, and his daughter, Miss Irene, both of whom died within 24 hours. They had been ill for several days, growing gradually weaker. The final cause of death in each case was pneumonia. Mr. Atkinson died Monday afternoon, his daughter dying at the same hour on the next day. Flu closes schools, churches, theater. Because of the prevalence of the flu in this vicinity, Hastings officials announced Wednesday morning all meeting places, such as churches, schools, and other public gathering places, will be closed until further notice. In announcing the closing of these places, the officials point out the situation in Hastings this year is by no means as serious as it was a year ago. At the time of issuing the closing order, the worst local cases of influenza were reported as being in the homes of Joseph Smiley, where 5 members of the family were ill, and in that of town clerk L.A. McClendon, where 3 had been stricken. Other cases are scattered here and there about the town. Emphasis is placed, however, on the fact that there is no occasion for local panic, as it is expected the epidemic this year will be far less violent than it was in 1919. Hastings Unit of the Florida National Guard formed. The Hastings Unit of the Florida National Guard is now an established fact, and Hastings has become one of the dozen or 15 cities and towns of this state to be represented in the new military establishment. A striking feature of the event is that the entire supply company of 31 men was signed up and recruited in less than 2 days. It's expected that rifles and other equipment of the company will arrive within 3 or 4 weeks, when the work of drilling will be started in earnest. As yet, no arrangements have been made for an armory, although that will probably be arranged for in the near future. Lost thumb. T.D. Chenault is recovering from an injury which cost him one of his thumbs and narrowly missed costing him an arm as well. His thumb was caught in the sprocket of a potato planter recently when a mule started suddenly and so badly mangled his thumb that the amputation was necessary. On to this week's Talk of the Times, where I give you a glimpse of what people were thinking over 100 years ago. This time, we're looking at how President's Day was celebrated in Hastings, Florida, back in 1920. But at that time, it wasn't President's Day as we know it, but rather a celebration of George Washington's birthday. In St. Johns County, they celebrated with a ball in St. Augustine. Here's the article telling all about it and what you needed to do if you wanted to attend. It reads, "One of the gayest and most brilliant of the events of the whole winter season in St. Augustine will be the costume ball to be given in honor of George Washington's birthday on the evening of Monday, February 23rd. Through the kindness of manager William McAuliffe of the Hotel Alcazar, the ball will be held in the Alcazar Casino, and the affair is under the auspices of the Flagler Hospital Auxiliary, the proceeds being used for the endowment of free beds in the wards." No more beautiful setting than the Alcazar Casino ballroom could be imagined for the charity costume ball. The floor is perfect, and music for the dancing will probably be furnished, as heretofore, by the combined orchestras of the two palatial hotels, Ponce de Leon and Alcazar. The fact is stressed that people who attend the ball as spectators need not feel it incumbent upon them to appear in ballroom dress or fancy costumes. There are many who will wish to visit the casino for an hour or so and sit and watch the dancing. For these, street costumes will be quite appropriate, and there will be no criticism whatever of the people thus attired. Now, as regards to the costumes for the dancers, any costume from the simplest to the most elaborate old or new will be quite fine, and anyone in doubt what to choose may command the services of the Committee on Costumes, who will furnish advice and simple sketches of the costume most becoming and the least trouble. Any men who find it difficult to get the necessary work done for a complete costume will be just as welcome in evening clothes embellished by a star or order of some sort on a ribbon to add to the general scheme. It will greatly assist in the success of the ball, however, if those who have time and inclination will appear in as gay and original costumes as possible. Several artists have kindly volunteered to make the necessary sketches. I hope you enjoyed this week's edition of Hastings Headline History. This podcast was brought to you by Presenting the Past, bringing history back to the present through historic presentations and the sale of treasures from days gone by. This episode was written and produced by me, Michelle Murillo, with the aid of vintage copies of the Hastings Herald. Now it's time for this week's musical memory, when we listen back to a song that everyone was listening to 100 years ago. As we celebrate Black History Month, let's get to better know an artist who was knocking down racial barriers and was taking over the world of music 100 years ago. Music was in Clarence Williams' blood. After all, his father was a bassist, but home life wasn't good to him, and at 12 years old, he ran away to join a traveling minstrel show in New Orleans. He did anything the show asked of him, from shining shoes to odd jobs, but eventually he was able to work his way into becoming a singer and then the master of ceremonies. He learned to play piano and started composing music, and over time he became an industry, creating the largest African-American-owned music publishing firm in the country. He married blues singer Eva Taylor, and they bought a large house in Queens, New York, where they celebrated music, building a community of Black artists who could perform without the racial segregation and discrimination that was the rule of the time. He and Eva also performed together often, including in this week's musical number. Here's Clarence Williams' composition with Eva Taylor singing, "Mandy, Make Up Your Mind."
walking down the aisle with you. You'll make 'em all stare with a little black-eyed Susan stuck in your hair. Gee, but you're the candy, Mandy, won't you decide? Everything is dandy, Mandy, once you're my bride. In a year or two,